On one of the most brutal winter days in Montana, during what felt like the coldest stretch in American history, Mark Johnson jolted awake, shivering from the intense cold. As usual, he glanced at the thermometer on the porch and his blood ran even colder. It read -55 degrees Fahrenheit. Nature itself seemed frozen in time. Frost coated every blade of grass and every leaf, and everything around him looked like a fragile ice sculpture. Mark, who had grown up in Montana, always considered himself accustomed to the harsh winds and frigid nights, but even for him, this temperature was beyond extreme. He made himself a cup of hot coffee and tried to catch the weather report on TV. But just as the howling wind became a deafening drone, powerful gusts buffeting the house and obscuring everything outside the frosted windows, the scalding liquid spilled across him and onto the floor, barely registering amidst the chaos. However, the real shock awaited Mark at the window. He was completely unprepared for what he saw. Pressed against the glass was a Pallas's cat, its thick golden-brown fur dusted with frost, its lithe body trembling visibly from the relentless cold. But there was more. Huddled behind her, on a small knoll of powder snow that blended almost seamlessly with the white expanse, were 3 tiny kittens. Their barely visible silhouettes shook like aspen leaves, and their plaintive, high-pitched mews were almost completely drowned out by the raging storm. Suddenly, one of the kittens weakened so much it could barely stand, as if about to surrender to the icy wind. But the mother cat wouldn't give in. Realizing how critical the moment was, she gently tugged the kitten by the scruff of its neck and pulled it closer to the window. Her movements were both purposeful and filled with boundless love. Every careful step spoke of her refusal to give up. The Pallas's cat's labored breathing seemed to grow fainter as she peered inside, as if silently begging for help. Just then, the wind whipped against the glass, pelting the house with handfuls of snowflakes. Stunned, Mark felt his heart pounding in his chest, as if it were trying to burst free. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The mother cat carefully raised a paw and began to tap lightly on the glass with her claws in a rhythmic pattern, as if sending a message. Mark hesitated. The thought of letting wild animals into his house, with a blizzard raging outside, was daunting. But realizing that there was no time to lose, he forced himself to the door and cracked it open. In that instant, the mother cat didn't hesitate for a second. Leaping over the porch step, she gently placed her weakening kitten inside the doorway. She stepped back, showing humility and desperation, but her eyes remained resolute and filled with unwavering pleading. Overcome with conflicting emotions, Mark carefully picked up the small, shivering creature and carried it into the warmth of his home. The mother cat glanced momentarily at the 2 remaining kittens, who continued to mew pathetically, and Mark knew he couldn't stop at one. "Bring the other kittens too," seemed to echo in his head, though it was just a silent request, clear in the animal's entire demeanor. Once all 3 kittens were inside, the exhausted mother turned her face back to the doorway, as if seeking permission to enter. Mark nodded, stepping back. Carefully shaking off her frosted fur, the Pallas's cat slipped into the house. The atmosphere immediately filled with a primal wild energy, though she behaved with extreme caution, as if understanding that guests in a human dwelling should be considerate. Mark quickly stoked the fireplace and gathered some blankets, creating a makeshift warm nest. The Pallas's cats, mother and tiny kittens alike, seemed to feel a long-awaited relief. The mother gently nudged her babies closer to the fire, smoothing the blankets and trying to make them as comfortable as possible. For a moment, she looked up at Mark, and in her eyes, there was something that could only be interpreted as gratitude. Mark felt an unexpected warmth of connection spread through his chest. Outside, the storm raged. The wind howled like a pack of wolves hunting prey, but inside the house, a sense of calm prevailed. The kittens, exhausted by the cold, slowly began to recover. The smallest of them, snuggling closest to the fire, made a faint, plaintive sound that, surprisingly, filled the room with renewed hope. Mark watched in awe as the mother cat licked her kittens one by one, literally bringing them back to life. The tiny paws stopped trembling so violently, and their eyes no longer expressed despair. Curiosity began to outweigh fear. The little Pallas's cats peeked shyly at the man, but showed no signs of panic, as if they understood that Mark wouldn't harm them. Time seemed to stretch out inside the house. The flames of the fireplace were reflected in the animals' eyes, giving their fur a golden glow, a stark contrast to the relentless white chaos outside the window. Mark found himself lost in contemplation of these amazing creatures, and the mother cat periodically cast glances at him, filled with both wary attention and quiet trust. Soon, she moved unhurriedly towards the kitchen. At the doorway, the palace's cat stopped and looked at Mark, as if asking permission. He understood her silent question and put some cooked chicken on a plate, placing the food on the floor. With the utmost care, the mother cat took the offering and carried it to the kittens, meticulously dividing it among them. The elements outside showed no sign of letting up. The snowdrifts continued to grow, and the icy wind tried to penetrate every crack in the wooden house. But here, inside, the fireplace radiated life-saving warmth, and something resembling an unspoken alliance was forming between the man and the wild family. Mark realized the responsibility he had suddenly taken on. Releasing the palace's cats back into such a storm would be a death sentence. He had to at least wait out the night. Soon, the mother cat began to behave even more remarkably. She carefully, as if afraid to damage anything, adjusted the blankets, and her grown kittens, becoming a little bolder, began to cautiously explore their new surroundings. Surprisingly, they didn't scratch the furniture and tried to stay close to the heat. It seemed as if the animals understood the fragility of this refuge, given to them by a human. As the hours passed, the storm slowly subsided. The palace's cats had managed to rest and warm up, and their mother occasionally glanced at Mark, as if she wanted to say something important. Finally, the moment came when she stood up and stretched, indicating that it was time to leave. Gently nudging her kittens towards the door, she waited for Mark to crack it open. The cold wind, rushing inside, sent a wave of frost that made him shiver. The kitten Manuls were shy at first, wary of the snowdrifts, but their mother patiently encouraged them, gently nudging them with her nose. Before finally stepping outside, she suddenly raised her paw and touched Mark's hand for a few seconds. This brief touch seemed to convey to his soul the depth of her gratitude. In the next moment, the family of Palace's cats disappeared into the swirling snow, merging with the boundless white. Left on the doorstep, Mark stared for a long time after the disappearing shadows. The world around him was filled with silence again, but a special warmth lingered in the house, brought by these wild guests. Against the backdrop of the gradually calming wind, Mark realized that he had gained an invaluable experience. He had witnessed not only the struggle for life in a harsh land, but also the invisible connection between man and wild nature, which can arise, it would seem, at the most unexpected time. So, in the coldest season in American history, at a temperature of -55 degrees Fahrenheit, a story of kindness and mutual understanding was born, of unspoken gratitude that illuminates the heart and inspires belief in miracles even in the most difficult days.